which was sponsored by the City of Pasadena Cultural Affairs Commission. So we got a grant to do dance education for the community. So all these events have been free, and our last event today for Speaking of Dance is, I'm really happy to have John Clifford here. He has an incredible history in Los Angeles and in the dance world as well. So I've asked him to come and speak about a little bit about himself, show some videos, and this forum can be any way he wants it to be today. So there's no kind of way of going. You can chat. So it's up to you. You can shape it. And but your history and your information is what I'm after. Okay, well,
I want to hear that.
I want to hear and a couple of really good stories that nobody else would hear. Some juicy.
You better get the wine.
Some juicy stuff. I'll open the white wine.
I think
Is that too bright for you? I can turn that down. No, that's good. It looks. How's that on tape? Good. Good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that was an not an all right.
Well, it's just orange.
What, orange?
No, it's amber. Go ahead, John. Good.
Tan. So I guess I'm going to hope that you ask a lot of questions to spur me on. But as John said, well, actually he didn't say, but I was born in Los Angeles. I'll give you a quick bio. I was born in Los Angeles. My parents were in show business in Earl Carroll's Vanities. You know what that was? That was like the last bastion of vaudeville. And they had the original theater at Sunset and Vine, which is now, I think, Nickelodeon. But that was originally the Earl Carroll Vanities Theater. And it was a nightclub variety show. And then they changed it into the Moulin Rouge. It was known as the Moulin Rouge for many years, a big Hollywood night spot. And then, I can't remember, something came in between, and then I think now it's the Nickelodeon Theater.
Yeah. It's still Nickelodeon, yeah.
Nickelodeon. But that's where I first was on stage. When I was like 2 years old, I was in my father's acrobatic act. So I started young. And Balanchine, I will talk a lot about Balanchine, because he really was more my father than my father. My mother had 6 husbands, so she went through them pretty fast.
Wow.
Another story about my dad later. But my dad was part of a 2-man acrobatic act. I guess they call it the male adagio act. Very Cirque du Soleil-ish, in today's terms. And one guy did the lifting, the other one did flips and things. And I was in that when I was 2 years old. My dad got me on stage. And on my Facebook, I actually posted photographs of me standing in my dad's hands, like when I'm 2, things like that. And my mother was in the show as the class act singer. She sang light opera. And I think she went into that show when she was like 18, so she was very young. And my dad was 44 and my mother was 20 when they married. So it sort of was like a reverse cougar. And her singing career pretty much stopped. She did sing a bit, but they divorced, so I was sort of shuttled off to military boarding schools, which I'm very thankful for now, because it's the only thing that gave me any discipline at all. So, but I didn't. I always danced. I was in, like I said, I was in show business at 2, so I was used to the theater and I was used to showgirls. And I remember one of my earliest memories is in the orchestra pit, pretending to conduct the orchestra, and looking up and seeing all the showgirls in their nylons and their neck tights and high heels and all. So I was just sort of born into the theater, so it's the most natural thing for me to go into it. And I always danced. I remember always hyperkinetic, moving around dancing to music. I didn't have any choice. My mother didn't really want me to go into show business. She wanted me to be a lawyer because I argued all the time. She thought you should be a lawyer. But anyway, I started training in Los Angeles at 9 years old with a very influential teacher in those days named Catherine Etienne. And she was part of this very large family called the Charisse family. And Nico Charisse was the first husband of Sid Charisse. Actually, Sid Charisse was born in Texas. I think her last name is Finklia. But she married Nico, and the siblings, there were 11 children that used to tour Europe with their parents when they used to have ballet on vaudeville. So they were the Charisse family of ballet dancers. But they did flamenco, they did all kinds of stuff, but ballet predominantly. And I was lucky to start with Katie Etienne, and she was also Mitzi Gaynor's teacher. So she was used to teaching kind of Hollywood people. And I got private classes from her sister, Marie Charisse. But my focus was going to be going into Broadway and being a singer, dancer, actor kind of thing, because I also acted. I was on television as an actor when I was very young, and Death Valley Days with Ronald Reagan and different people. Day in Court show. I was on the early version of Judge Judy, kind of. I was in Day in Court a lot. Donna Reed show. Anyway, but I'm trying to go as fast as possible. But in those days, so let's say around 1957-ish, I started around 1956. I was actually on TV when I was 11 on the Dinah Shore show twice. When I was 11, dancing classical pas de deux with a little girl named Susie Pepito, who in the movie of Gypsy is Baby June. But she changed her name to Morgan Brittany and became a pretty well-known actress on Dallas and a few other things. And my first experience really with ballet, classical ballet, the big was the New York City Ballet when they came out to do Nutcracker at the Greek Theater. And I was chosen to do the Nutcracker Prince. And, you know, I was thrilled, terrified, really. But Balanchine, I remember even then, was a very unique force. He was very calm, he was very kind, he was in complete command, but not the least bit autocratic, not the least bit what you'd expect from a Russian European genius ballet master. I mean, he was complete. And I remember once in a rehearsal, the first stage rehearsal, I was taught the role by the ballet mistress, Janet Reed, who had been one of his well-known ballerinas. But then he took over for stage rehearsals, and in the Prince's pantomime, you're supposed to walk stage right and gesture to stage left. And I guess I turned my back too far to the front, and Balanchine said, "No, dear, I know that girl up there is very pretty, but you have to show the audience what you're doing." And then another time in the stage rehearsal as the Nutcracker, when you're the Nutcracker, you have to run and jump on the Mouse King's back. And I was, I was very enthusiastic, so I jumped over him actually, and I grabbed him around the neck and almost killed the poor guy because I was supposed to land on his back, but I just overdid it. So I jumped, grabbed him by the neck, we both went rolling, everybody in the company cracked up, and Balanchine went, "You don't have to jump so high, but good." And that was the first time I met George Balanchine. And the performances were mind-blowing. The Sugar Plum Fairy was the original Maria Tallchief with Nikki Maglianis. And since I was the prince, I got to sit on the throne in the back so I could watch every performance. And the alternate Sugar Plum Fairy was, I think she was 19, Allegra Kent, who's also from Los Angeles. There were a lot of great dancers who came from this town. And she alternated with Maria Tallchief as the Sugar Plum. And she also did the Dewdrop. Are you familiar with the Balanchine Nutcracker at all? The Dewdrop is a really difficult principal role. She did the Dewdrop alternating with a very young Violette Verdi. And Violette was, now that I look back at it, Violette was, I think, in her first year with the company. And she was French trained, but Balanchine adored her. And Violette had to jump like today, a Sipova. She jumped like incredible. I couldn't believe the height she got. And she was very sweet and very lively. So it was a very good first introduction, to classical ballet to have that experience. It was amazing. And then I did a lot of TV shows. I then went to what was probably the most well-rounded, biggest dance school, American School of Dance, which was run by Eugene Loring. And Eugene Loring was the choreographer of Billy the Kid. And he hated Balanchine. I'll get into that later. But they were rivals in the 1930s for a minute, but they were rivals. And Loring had a very big school on Hollywood Boulevard, just a few blocks, 2 blocks east of La Brea, at the bottom of this big old hotel. Were you around for that?
No, but I'm just recalling some history about that.
Yeah, and it had 2 big studios downstairs underneath the hotel, and it was kind of the place in those days. LA has always had, not so much now, but it used to have a really large group of Russian immigrant teachers. Bronislava Nijinsky taught here, Slavinska taught here. One of my other teachers was Maria Bekefi, who was not well known, but a brilliant teacher. Carmelita Marachi, I studied with all of them. But
the two brothers in Hollywood.
Panayev, Kozlovs.
Yeah.
Who else? I didn't study with Panayev and Kozlovs,
Okay.
but Carmelita Marachi was very influential. She taught Cynthia Gregory, Allegra Kent. By the time I got to her, I was about 14 or 15, and she was very old. And she would give long lectures about Beethoven, about music, in the middle of the bar. And then she'd go off on a tangent, but it was brilliant. And then she would give exercises at the bar, like closing your eyes, doing frappes, and balancing with your eyes closed, which is, try it. I mean, my God. And then doing frappes, snapping your fingers in syncopation with the frappe. So it builds a kind of a center strength. And if you look at Cynthia Gregory, there are videos of her, or if you've seen her live, or Allegra Kent, their placement and their backs are so strong. They have a center like I've never seen, and that comes from that. I swear it comes from Carmelita. And I have a really good balance. I don't need to brag, but I have a very good sense of balance. And I think that also came from my father standing on my head in his hand when I was a child, I mean, obviously. But it also came, I think, from Carmelita Marachi's training. And when I teach on a regular basis, I'll give stuff from Carmelita just because it really shapes people up. But she's a genius, and I happen to know, just by chance, the woman that made all of her costumes, because Carmelita used to have a small touring group, and she was one of the first major female choreographers. You should really look up her history. It's quite fascinating. And she was in an American Ballet Theater. She was a ballerina, but not well known, but she was on her way to become. But she was very temperamental, very egocentric, an indomitable will, and she wanted to choreograph. And in those days, you know, except for Agnes and Mill, there wasn't much you could do. So Carmelita left ABT, came to Los Angeles, started her own touring group out of LA, and got rave reviews everywhere she went, including the New York Times. John Martin went crazy for her because she would choreograph everything, dance on point shoes. Her core would, she had like a small group, 4 to 6 people. They would do something, she would come back out in character shoes and do a flamenco number with castanets. And then she'd go back and change and come back. So it was quite an interesting woman. And I read all these reviews that her wardrobe costume designer had kept. Because I took class from her, but I didn't know for how many years she was so influential. You know, so she was a really strong influence in Los Angeles. But anyway, so I studied with Loring, and I studied with Carmelita, and I studied with Maria Bicchefi, again, who was a very incredible teacher from the Ballet Russe period. And also doing television shows, acting, and then I became a regular dancer on the Danny Kaye show when I was 18. Then I went to New York because I thought I was going to go on Broadway. That was kind of my career trajectory, except that Anton Dolan came to town. Well, first, chronologically, I did go to New York. I had made some money on the Danny Kaye show, so I knew I could go and live off that money for a little while. And I took class at the Joffrey School. I took class at ABT School with Leon Danilian and Perry Slavik, who was a very influential Russian teacher in New York in those years, and at Balanchine, School of American Ballet. And, you know, not to be falsely humble or falsely conceited, I was one of the better boys at the Joffrey School and the ABT School. But at the SAB School, School of American Ballet, I sucked. I was really like, wait a minute, I'm nowhere up to this level. It was really an eye-opener. So of course I loved it because it was a challenge. So I was paying for classes. I didn't think to ask. And then my money ran out. So I went up to Diana Adams, who was the head of the school in those days. Very severe. She always wore black. She was very tall, never cracked a smile. Really intimidating. But I went up to her when my money ran out, and I said, is there any way I could get a scholarship or free classes? And she looked down at me and she goes, well, of course, John, you have one when you want it. We were wondering when you were going to ask. And, you know, and I was wearing braces at the time, and I was eating an apple, and I was, oh, thank you, and I spit a piece of apple. And she was, you know, I was like really embarrassed, but she was gracious. So I studied at school a few months, and then I just couldn't survive anymore on money, and I didn't want to be a waiter, and I'd always been a professional performer. And so I went back to Los Angeles and joined what was then supposedly LA's great hope to have a classical ballet company. So we'll get into this a bit. Is this interesting for you?
Yes. Yeah.
So before I'd gone to New York, Balanchine had come out with the New York City Ballet because they were doing annual summer seasons at the Greek Theater. When the Greek Theater was run by Jimmy Doolittle, he was a big ballet fanatic. He loved Mia Slavinska personally. They might have had an affair. But he was a big supporter of Balanchine bringing New York City Ballet out every summer. He brought out ABT, he brought out the Royal Danish. So as a young dancer in LA, I mean, the summer was great because we'd get all the major companies at the Greek, and then the Bolshoi with Ray Fontaine would play the Shrine or the Hollywood Bowl. There was quite a lot going on. I mean, much more than now. I mean, now it's a desert, really. But it was quite a lot of good top-level ballet to see. It was cheaper to tour in those days. Now it's so expensive. Anyway, so Balanchine always wanted to have a ballet company in Los Angeles because he loved LA. When he was married to Vera Zarina, he lived in LA. He had a German Shepherd here. It's another story. And he just loved it. And so he wanted to be helpful. So Jimmy Doolittle, wanted to help him. So they put together this idea to have a local Los Angeles Ballet. The Music Center had just been built, so it was around 1965. So there would be a place for a resident company, finally a major theater. And Balanchine's gimmick was brilliant because during the summer of, I think it was 65, during the New York City Ballet's 2-3 week run, he did, I think it was really a brilliant idea. He auditioned local dancers, teenagers mostly, to do Serenade, to be performed within the program of the New York City Ballet at the Greek. So the whole program was Serenade and 2 other ballets, but the Serenade that night would be all local Los Angeles dancers as the beginning of the Ballet of Los Angeles. So I went. I wasn't involved with anything there, but I went to see it, and it was beautiful. I mean, the girls did great, and the girl that did the lead was 17, Kevin O'Rourke, and she later became a dancer in my company. Long story. But that went very well. Then they did a performance at the Music Center, and the reviews were great. This was pre-Martin Bernheimer, pre-Siegel. The reviews were great. We'll get into that too. So there was support. There was a good feeling about the whole thing. But Balanchine, of course, wasn't going to leave New York and move to LA. He had the New York City Ballet. So he gave basically Jimmy Doolittle the board of directors here. On the Music Center performances, it was Paradis, Firebird, what was the other one? Raymonda, no, what was it? Paradis, Firebird, something else. I'll think of it in a minute. I didn't brush up on this. I didn't know what I was going to be talking about. But Maria Tallchief, who had also come from Los Angeles, did Firebird. Carol Scheimoff, who was a young girl from Los Angeles that had been in New York City Ballet briefly, did the lead in Paradis. Can't think what else was on the program. But anyway, it was a big success. So Balanchine said to the board, here, you have all these dancers, Jimmy Doolittle, as your patron, the head of the board, etc. And he went back to New York. And then the board did the dumbest thing. They hired Eugene Loring to be the director. Now, Eugene Loring was a brilliant choreographer, but he hated Balanchine. And Eugene Loring's idea of classical ballet was not from the old romantic, imperial school, but a more drama Antony Tudor-based school, which is a completely different thing. And when Balanchine did the auditions for the first ballet of Los Angeles, for the Greek Theater Serenade, I was a student at Loring's school. And Balanchine rented the studios for rehearsals. And Loring was livid, but he needed the money for the studios. So, at certain hours would be all these beautiful, talented girls from Los Angeles and the Balanchine ballet mistress and people in rehearsing Serenade. So, of course, I was watching all this. And then every Saturday, Loring would do a 2-hour class for his scholarship students. I had a partial scholarship at Loring School. My scholarship meant that I had to clean the bathrooms and the mirrors because he wanted to discipline me, and I couldn't afford the classes, so that was fine. But he would harangue us for 2 hours every Saturday during the period of this bitching about Balanchine and how it's not classical and it's not. We heard this for 2 hours every Saturday. Like, okay, enough. We know you don't like him. So Balanchine goes back to New York. The board hires Loring. So immediately Loring kicked out all the Balanchine influence. And he made it kind of an offshoot of his American School of So he brought in Yvonne Mounsey and a couple of his teachers from American School of Dance to teach. He brought in Bella Lewitsky to have a modern class. And they were, that was going to be the repertory. It was going to be a Loring idea. And Balanchine was, a letter was written to him. His secretary told me about it. Basically, Eugene Loring wrote Balanchine, thanks, but no thanks. We don't need you now. We're fine. That didn't last very long. And during that period, I had gone to New York for my first time and was taking class at SAB. So when I came back to Los Angeles, if you can follow my logic here, when I came back to Los Angeles, Balanchine was out, Loring was in, but then right out. And I don't know what happened between him and the board, it just wasn't working. So at that point, the name was changed from Ballet of Los Angeles to Western Ballet Association. Loring was out. So Jimmy Doolittle had walked out. Of course, when they got rid of Balanchine, Doolittle said, well, that's the end of that. So it was basically the dress designer, Jean-Louis's wife, Maggie Louis, was running the company. And she meant well, but she's a patron. She's not an artistic director. But she was running the company. There was barely a board of directors. It was basically just her vanity show. They had written Balanchine to make peace with them, to try to bring him back in. So he was advising them, what teachers to use. And his favorite teacher in LA was Irina Kuzmovska. And he had used her as his teacher when he started the beginning of the company. And then she was relegated to one class a week by Loring. But then when Loring was out, then Irina they brought back in, and she was teaching the majority of classes. Yvonne Mounsey was teaching, June Morris was still teaching. Bella had gone by that point. So I joined that group. I was 18 and I needed a job. They didn't pay very much, but it was something. And they were getting ready to put on a big program with a full symphony orchestra at the Scottish Rite Auditorium. But there's no pit, so the orchestra had to be behind the dancers, behind a scrim, which is a little awkward. And they made me a soloist right off the bat, and then I got to choreograph 2 ballets of my own, because they didn't have any repertory, really. But what they decided to do was, again, I thought it was crazy. They did full Act 3 of Sleeping Beauty. Now this is no real professional dancers in the company. I mean, a couple, but not really. Lace Feed. Their ballet master, they gave the title chef de ballet, is still a popular teacher, Stefan Venta. That's where Stefan came into the picture. You're getting a full history. So Stefan came from Poland, and he was named chef de ballet, but he wasn't the artistic director. Maggie Louis was, no uncertain terms. And Stefan choreographed a couple ballets, one to the Mozart Jupiter Symphony, and I did the Fawn third movement. It was a nice solo for me. And then a really bizarre, communist-oriented Hindemith ballet about some dictator and a bunch of slaves. I mean, somebody understood what that was. But Balanchine came back. Maggie Louis had made peace with Balanchine, and they invited him back. I'm getting to the point here. So they brought Balanchine back because they were doing Serenade. And he came in to watch it, and he liked it, and then he watched my 2 ballets. And then, maybe it wasn't politically correct, but in front of Maggie, and there were the board members there and everything, Balanchine advised them on what to do. And he said, for a young company, and again, ABT was coming regularly, still all the major companies were coming. He said, for a young company, why don't do the classics? Don't do Sleeping Beauty, don't do, Lace Feet with young, because they can compare them to the major companies coming in with, stars. He said, do new ballets, modern choreography, do Stefan Venta's ballets, do Clifford's ballets, come up with your own profile, your own. He said, you can have all my ballets for free, whatever you want to do, but don't copy the majors doing Sleeping Beauty and so. And so I thought that was smart, because I knew I did Bluebird in that performance, but I knew we were out of our depth. I mean, I knew that we'd look silly, compared to ABT or the Royal, because the Royal Ballet used to come too. So anyway, so the Bolshoi was coming with Plesetskaya. I should talk more about her, but anyway, they went ahead with their plans. And after the rehearsal of my ballet, Barbara Horgan, who was Balanchine's secretary, she came up to me and she said, John, why didn't you tell us you choreographed when you were at the school? 6 months before that, I had been to school for those months. And I said, well, nobody asked me. And there was no workshop in those days. There was no SAB workshop, which is a big deal now. But in those years, they didn't have that. And so I said, nobody asked me. And she said, well, Balanchine would like you to come back and choreograph. And that's how it started. Not to come back and dance. But I got it. It's all right. I'll tell you a story about that later. But he was interested in me as a choreographer, and I went, oh, and being that I didn't want to do anything to make a living except dance, I said I can't afford, and the scholarship money they were paying the boys then was something like $80 a month, which you couldn't live on. And I said to her, I said, well, I can't live on that. And she said, well, no, we'll pay you whatever you need so that you can live fine. I went, all right, in that case. I called Barbara Horgan. I said, is Balanchine really wants me to come back? And she said, yes, come back and we'll get you a place to stay and we'll figure something out. I went, okay. So I did, and Balanchine comes out to me the first day, goes, okay, dear, start choreographing. And I was 19 at this point, and I went, but see, there was no workshop, there was no formula for this in those years. And I said, what do I do? And he goes, well, find music, choose girls, boys you want, take, and just tell the secretary and say you want 2 hours or 3 hours, do what you want. And I said, okay. So I did. So I chose Malcolm Arnold's Scottish dances, which was short, about 16 minutes, 4 movements, very dancey. Chose about 16 girls. I didn't realize at the time that was very ballsy, to choose such a large group. I choreographed a little bit at Eugene Loring's, but nothing, maybe as a popular solo or something, because that was part of our scholarship. We all had to choreograph a little something. But it just seemed the logical thing to do. So I chose 16 girls and 3 principal dancers. One was Star Denias, who later became a star with the Joffrey. She was a baby then. Lynn Bryson, who later went into New York City Ballet. And Bojan Spasov, who later, I think he heads Carlisle or something, or Pennsylvania Ballet School or something. Anyway, but he was a student at the school of the American Ballet. So I did this ballet in 2 weeks. And then I invited Balanchine. I said, well, I did a ballet, you want to come watch it? And he said, okay. So he came in with Suzanne Farrell, because in those days they were inseparable. This was pre-marriage, before she got married. And I wasn't nervous at all. Balanchine didn't make me nervous until way later, but I wasn't nervous. I just felt support coming from him. I just felt this, oh, dear, show me what you did. So they did the ballet. The kids were terrified. You don't have Balanchine sitting there. But they danced, everything went fine. And then he came up to me afterwards and he goes, okay, is this something you did in LA? And I went, no. Anyway, I'll never forget this because he kind of, to surprise Balanchine was a trick. I mean, he usually was could never fool him. And if you did try to fool, I'll tell you a story later, but he always never liked to be caught off guard, kind of, he always wanted. So he said, you didn't do this, when did you do this? And I said, well, since I got here last week. And he went, you did this in 2 weeks? And I said, yes. And he went, and I realized that was surprising to him, but I hadn't thought of it was fast. That's normal. Anyway, so then he said, okay, do something else, something new right away. And I went, okay. So then I did the Bizet Les Arlésiens suite, and then I did Morton Gould's Spirituals for Orchestra, string. It's really jazzy. You'd like it. It's really, really fun music. And I'd done the pas de deux that in LA, but I did the whole ballet there, and so I was doing like a ballet every week or two, and he was coming in and watching, and he was good, okay, good. And I tried to vary them. So one was classical, one was jazzy, and I used a lot of acrobatics from my dad in my early life. So I used some acrobatics that weren't typical for the ballet stage. Now they are, but we're going back to 1966. But everything was going along fine. And then Andre Gillespie had a company in Long Island, and he was one of the teachers at school, and he asked me to do a ballet for him. So I did revive a ballet I'd done in LA to Shasta College for 4 girls and me called The Class. It was kind of a classroom ballet. So I did the performance and I sprained my ankle badly in the performance. And there actually was a video of it, so you can see when it happens and I can kind of hop around. But then after that, I couldn't take class because, while my ankle was getting better. So I asked Balanchine, and this was the first time the only time that I got tongue-tied, is I went to Barbara Horgan, who was the secretary, brought me to New York, and I said, Barbara, I can't take class at school. Do you think Mr. B would let me watch company class? And I should back up. When I was first at the school choreographing, Balanchine invited me to come see New York City Ballet every night. And I said, well, I can't afford it. He said, no. And so he gave me tickets. So I would have tickets every single performance for me to watch the company. And he said, you have to come watch and you have to learn. You watch and learn. So I would dress up in a brown suit, because I only had one suit, because I thought you had to wear a suit. So I wore this brown suit every night, every 8 performances a week. So I was used to going to the theater, going to watch, but I never went backstage. So anyway, so I went up to him. I said to Barbara, do you think he'd let me watch company class? And she said, ask him. And I went, and she goes, class is going to be, at 11 o'clock. Just go in the hall outside, just get it before he goes into class and ask. She goes, I'm sure it'll be fine. So I wore my suit at 11 o'clock in the afternoon. I thought, well, I have to dress up. And he was, running to get to class, and I kind of waylaid him. I said, Mr. B, can I talk to him? He said, I have class. And I said, I know, I broke my, and I was stuttering, and he said, what? He kind of went, what? And I said, well, I sprained my ankle. Can I watch class? And he went, oh, yes. So we went in, and then, the company, probably they still are, but they're very close-knit, very snooty to outsiders. This is their territory. This is the main hall of State Theater. Nobody walks in there. But here I go in this brown suit, and so everybody kind of stares at me. It was just like a film. The door opens and everybody goes, just gave me this look of death. And I'm like, so Balanchine takes a chair, and he puts it in the front, not the front, but he puts it in the side, in the front, and he introduces me to the company. John, young choreographer, he's going to go watch. And I went, crap. So he sits me down, and so that went on every day for about 2 weeks. I just go and watch class. I realized the suit was tacky, so I stopped wearing the suit. And then one day he comes up to me and goes, dear, how's your ankle? And I said, well, it's better. He said, why don't you take? And I went, well, I'm going to go back. He said, no, take class. And I went, here. And I went, okay. So the next day I came in, and that first class, after the bar, I thought my muscles were on fire. I have never to this day felt that kind of pain. But it wasn't a bad pain. I knew I didn't hurt anything. It's just that every single fiber of my legs were like on fire, burning. I was like, oh my God. I'd never had a class like that at the school, and I had Gillespie's classes, and Pierre Vladimiroff, Stanley Williams. I had all the major teachers in the world, really. Plasetskaya, Messerer. I had Balanchine's class. Absolutely like, God, But everybody else survived, so so after a week or so, then it became possible, and then it was like, oh, well, I'm actually getting better. So then my ankle got fine, so then I went back to SAB. So after a few days, Diane Adams, who was still running the school, she comes up to me and she goes, John, why are you here? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, why are you taking class in the morning? You should be over taking Balanchine's class. And I went, well, my ankle's better now, so I thought I better get back to the school. She goes, well, why? You're in the company. You should be taking the company class. Nobody had told me. Not one person had said I was in the New York City Ballet. And I went, what? And she said, well, there's a contract waiting for you on the manager's desk. I mean, and she said, did anybody tell you? And I went, not one person said a word. So I ran back and signed my contract and was on. And that's the beginning of that story. So then lots of things wonderful happened. It's way too long to go into now. And Balanchine had me do my first ballet when I was 20 for the company. He gave me my first principal roles when I had been in less than a year. I got a reputation for jumping in, doing ballets without even knowing. Like in 1969, so I was like, 22. The company had a tour to Monte Carlo for a big Diaghilev celebration. And Princess Grace was still alive, and it was a huge deal. The company was flown over on a private jet, chartered. But it was just the New York City Ballet and some board members and some patrons, and it just was, this is paradise, And Balanchine was in a great mood. And I was in the corps, and I had done a couple solos in some of his ballets, and other ballets. Jacques D'Amboise had done a ballet that I did the premiere in. It's the third movement lead with Violette, which is great. And that was going to be on the program in Monte Carlo. And like the second or third day, I took class. I didn't have anything to do, so I was over at the Café Paris across from the casino. And the company manager runs up to me, Ronnie Bates, Eddie Bigelow, and he said, John, he said, Balanchine's looking for you. You have to come to the studio right now. And I went, there's no rehearsal. Why? He said, because you have to replace Eddie and Ruby's tonight. And Ruby's was part of Jules, which is a big new ballet that Balanchine did the year before, a year and a half before. And Eddie Villela was the superstar in those days. And Ruby's was the boys' ballet. And I went, what? And he goes, Eddie hurt himself. Balanchine wants you to do Ruby's tonight. And tonight was the gala on a stage in the courtyard of the Grimaldi Palace. So it wasn't just in the theater. That would have been one thing. It was a gala. And I'm like, okay, so I went back to the studio, and Balanchine and Patty McBride, who was the ballerina, and Eddie, who was limping terribly, and no pianist. They couldn't find the pianist. This was before cell phones. So the pianist had taken off a little tour somewhere. Nobody could find him, Gordon Belzer. So it was just Balanchine, the ballet misters. I think it was John Terrace, actually. Patty, Eddie, and me. And the plan was for Eddie to do the pas de deux, and for me to do the opening and closing movements. But it was clear really couldn't walk at all. So Balanchine said, dear Clifford, he called me Clifford. He said, let's start, and please just see how you do. So, luckily, because I'd been an actor, I think that was the key. And since I'd been on stage since 2 years old, and Balanchine was a non-threatening force. He was always a supportive force. I had the cojones to just say, okay, fine. And I found that I could memorize steps really fast, but I think that comes from me being an actor and having to read and memorize scripts. I don't have any other explanation for it. I don't know why, but I seem to have that ability that I could look at something, and this is in a book, so I'm not bragging about it. Balanchine actually said this to a writer once in a biography. It's in the last chapter about my ability. And it was so weird because I just did that. I just put myself into a blank state, just completely blank, and they started teaching me the choreography, which I had not understudied or anything at all. I had done the core of Ruby's, so I didn't even have time really to look at the principles. That was one ballet I couldn't go out and watch every night because I was in the core of it. So I really didn't know what the principals were doing. So we had 2 hours of rehearsal. I learned the whole ballet with no music. Then at 6 o'clock, they said to be at the theater at 6. The pianist will be there by then. So I got to the theater at 6. Since I'd done the core, I kind of knew where to stay out of the way of the principal, kind of. So I wasn't too concerned about bumping into the core. But so we had like another hour run through the music, and then I did it. And, knock on wood, I only made one minor mistake, where I kicked on the wrong side of Patty and I hit her hand a little bit with my foot, but that was it. Every music that you might think is there's a place where Patty's on one side and I'm on the other side. And we have to count 5/8, very fast eights, 1, 2, 3, 4, very fast. The first 4 of those are silent. Da, da, da. Or 5, 6, and then it comes in. So you have to catch it on the silence to do the 5/8. So I was counting like crazy, but I couldn't remember what the step was. Because you have to run in on the 5th 8 and start, and I was like blank. I was counting, I knew the 5/8, but I didn't know the step. And I didn't have contact lenses in those days, so I was blind as a bat on top of it. So I'm like gesturing to Patty on the other side, what's the step? She thought I lost the count, because that's really harder than the step, is the count. And she was going, 1, 2, 3. I said, no, what's the, so I tried to run across, I said, no, I can't get back, get back to my side. So I really just literally ran on the right cue, not knowing what, and like a step before I got there, I went, oh shit, yes, and I remember what the step was. That was most to this day, the biggest panic I've ever had as a performer, was running on stage blank, you would know. My God, it got to me. So I did it, everything was fine, and then Eddie came back, kind of pissed off at me, Villela. He was like, yeah, Clifford, I can't believe you did that. Yeah, well, good, yeah, you did it. Balanchine was beating. He was happy. And he was very, very happy. And he was like introducing me to Princess Grace and then David Niven, saying, oh, he learned this afternoon. Wonderful. I was like out of my mind at that point. I was like so exhausted. And I was glad it was over. And I was, if I would have screwed up, I would have been cemented in his brain, you know what I mean, as a screw up. So I knew that, I couldn't fail, but it worked. And then he kept me in the ballet, splitting all the performances with Eddie, which Eddie did not like. And then when Eddie started getting older, then I took over and nobody else danced for a reason but me until I left the company. And Balanchine was always, I'm not bragging, but Balanchine was always like that with his dancers. If he put you in that ballet, you usually didn't have an alternate. Sometimes you wouldn't even have an understudy, which is a little crazy. But and when he was choreographing, he didn't really want anybody else in the room. He was just making the ballet for you. So, and it wasn't just me. I mean, Violette, Melissa, if it was a new ballet or something, most all the dancers that he choreographed on, it was like this big gift. That was your ballet, and there was a relationship between you, the music, the choreography, and Balanchine. Now, if it was a ballet he was reviving, an old ballet, maybe there might be 2 casts. But generally speaking, in those years, it was a very personal, relationship with him, with all of his dancers, not just the leads, the core too. Everybody knew. It was a really unique. I've never seen any other company like him. It was brilliant. From the New York City Ballet and teach some classes for Irina Kosmovska, who was my favorite teacher in those days. And one year, she had a student company called Los Angeles Junior Ballet, and they would do these performances like school recitals. So she invited me to her president of her board, Betty Empey, who later became a big force. She stayed at LA Dance Kaleidoscope, Betty. But Betty invited me to come back because I was going to be in LA anyway. She goes, "Do you want to do something on this show or maybe choreograph?" I said, "Sure." So I brought out a couple of dancers from New York City Ballet that had come from Los Angeles, from Irina School. Lily Samuels, who later married Brandon Tartikoff, who was the head of NBC, brought Lily out. Marilee Stiles, who later married Stuart Stern, who wrote Rebel Without a Cause screenplay. And the 2 Bourne sisters. Bonita Bourne, who later became a ballet mistress for San Francisco, and Lisa Bourne, who became one of Baryshnikov's last partners in New York City Ballet, and then she also now stages Balanchine around the world. So all these kids were from LA, all trained by Irina. So I brought them back to dance on the program. And then some local ballet patrons saw the review, which was nice, and had dinner with me and said, "John, would you be interested in maybe doing more in LA and trying to start a company?" And I went, "Well, I can't start a company," because I was only at that point 25 or something, 26, and very busy in New York City Ballet. By that point, I was a principal dancer. I had choreographed 8 ballets for New York City Ballet. The press was calling me Balanchine's heir apparent and all that stuff. I didn't say it, but they did, so protege, etc. And I was very happy in New York, and I was very happy with Balanchine. It was great, everything was wonderful. But I choreographed 8 ballets, and Balanchine was very vital still. And Jerry Robbins was back with the company. And I was an original in Dances at a Gathering, his comeback, and in Goldberg Variations, and I was original principal in Evenings Waltzes. So I was, but Jerry choreographing for the company, Balanchine choreographing still masterpiece after masterpiece. I was feeling pretty redundant, and since my main goal was to please Balanchine when I choreographed, which I usually did. He put my ballets on, so I guess they couldn't be that bad. I kind of felt, am I doing anything really choreographically? Because he does it better, and Jerry does it better. Whatever I do, they're going to do it better. So I felt, well, that's not going anywhere. I'd invited to be the director of the Deutsche Oper when I was 25. But Balanchine told me to turn that down. He said, "You and the Germans, forget it." And he was right. He said a big opera house would have just chewed me up, and he was right. I said, okay. So I turned them down. But so I liked the idea of coming to Los Angeles and maybe doing different kinds of choreography, and and I love LA. That's why I still live here right now. Right now, that's the only reason I'm here. I love it. So I thought, well, let's see what happens. So we did some concerts. Again, the press was great. I did another program and brought out Violette Verdi and Allegra Kent and Tony Blum and Sarah Leland with local Los Angeles dancers as the core and a couple local Los Angeles dancers as leads. And they started a company, it's called Los Angeles Ballet Theater then, because Los Angeles Ballet name wasn't available, so the board chose that. And then after 3 times of doing that, I thought, and I was starting to get, like my idea of a company was like a family, because that's how Balanchine was with the company. It was was a family. It wasn't a business, it was a family. So I felt like that, and I felt guilty when I was leaving the dancers and going back to New York, with my secure career. And then all these kids, they really didn't have much to do unless I came out to do something. So finally I said to Mr. B, I said, I think, I was 26 years old, I just turned 26. I said, I just turned, 26. I said, I think I really need to stay in LA and really try to, he didn't want me to. He said, no, dear, because LA, they don't really want to support it. And I tried, he said, I tried back 10 years ago, they didn't want to do, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I got to give it a shot. And the board was bringing in some big heavyweight people at that time, And so he said, well, okay, if you must, you must. And then 6 weeks later, the City Ballet was coming to the Greek, and they called me to come back and dance. And I was like, okay. And I thought, what? He said, no, just one of your ballets, maybe Stars and Stripes with Gelsey, because she was going to leave too at that point. And it was, my timing was bad because Balanchine was bringing Coppelia into the company for me and Gelsey. So we started all the rehearsals with Coppelia. Danila was supposed to be me and Gelsey. But no, I left to come here and she left to go dance with Misha. But I should have stayed another year to do Coppelia. I really should have stayed. Anyway, but I was young and dumb. So I came to LA and he brought me back to New York for 2 years off and on to keep guesting with the company. Then Bershikov joined the company and they didn't need me, which is understandable. So then after Misha left, he brought me back again in 1980. I danced with the company again after Bershikov had left. So that was the last time I did Oberon. That's a whole other story. But, so we struggled in LA, and the biggest problem, to be really blunt, was Dorothy Chandler and the Music Center. And I met her because my optometrist was her optometrist. And Dr. Bernice Brown, very wonderful woman, who was very supportive. She was on my board, and she thought it would be good for me to meet Dorothy. And so I said, fine. So she set up, she didn't tell me she was doing this in advance, but she set up an appointment so we'd be in her office at the same time. So I had my examination. She goes, oh, John, I want you to meet Mrs. Chandler. I went, so there, Mrs. Chandler was sitting there, Dorothy, and I had never spoken to her. And I was introduced, and I said, it was so wonderful to meet you, and I want to thank you so much for building the Music Center and giving our town, a real proper center for the arts. And she was like, immediately I got a bad vibe, and I went, and she goes, well, and I'll tell, this is going to be on the record, but she said, well, you don't have anything to do with that horrible Stanley Holden or his wife, do you? And I didn't. I liked Stanley. He was a very good teacher here in LA, very popular for many years, and I was just shocked by that attack on Stanley, And I went, no. Well, I tried to help them, I let them have their school in my pavilion, and then we renovated the musicians' annex to have the school over there. But they were so ungrateful, and they wanted more and more and more. And she goes, I can't stand them, and I really don't like ballet. So I was like, geez, do I have a return ticket to New York? Because this is, not a good way to start. So I just said, well, I hope you change your mind, and we're going to do things very slowly, and and I kind of backed out of the room because it was impossible. And the other bad sign in the beginning was Martin Bernheimer, because he had given us a good review when I had come out with the New York City Ballet dancers. He'd given us a very nice review of the Times. But when I announced I was moving here and everything, he invited me to lunch at the dining room at the LA Times building. And I said, oh, fine. And so I went to lunch, and I can't believe this. He said, why did you leave New York? And I explained why. And he goes, well, did you and Balanchine have a fight? And I went, no. Quite the opposite, no. And he went, well, LA doesn't have any culture. They'll never have any culture. And I went, this is the music editor of the LA Times, and he's bad-mouthing my city. And I got I said, well, Martin, I said, I was born here, I was brought up here, and we had sold out houses for every ballet company that came through. The New York City Opera, San Francisco Opera used to come all the time. They were sold out. I said, maybe LA doesn't have its own culture because it's kind of a young city, but boy, the people in LA like culture. So I'm hoping to tap into that and give them, And he went, he said, well, no matter what I may write about you, just go ahead and do what you think you should. And then I found out, just to finish this without getting too negative, is that we had some very good board members. Irving Stone, the author of Agony and the Ecstasy, his wife was on our board, Jean Stone. Victor M. Carter, who was, I think, one of the biggest benefactors of the University of Tel Aviv, and he was a very big philanthropist in LA, he was on our board. We used to call him Papa Carter. He was a great, wonderful, supportive man. And Jim Jacobson, who was the West Coast head of Prudential Life Insurance and was a Mormon, was on our board. So we had a real mix of, Dorothy Chandler herself was getting on the phone, calling these people to get off our board. And Jean Stone, when they said, John, I told her, stop calling me, Dorothy, because the ballet needs our help. We want to have a ballet company in town. And Dorothy said, well, the Music Center needs your help. The LA Philharmonic is the thing. We need your help. So it got to be this competition that I didn't know how to solve. I didn't know. And there was a very interesting woman, named Olive Barrett, who was a big Music Center supporter, but she was also an extra in a lot of movies and TV shows. And she looked like, the actress Martita Hunt? You ever heard of Martita Hunt? She had a very big face, you would say a horsey face in a way, but very elegant, and she would play these English dowagers and things. And so Olive Barrett, I think she had a lot of money, but her hobby was to be in movies as an extra, or just to be there. There was a hobby. So I got to know Olive, because my company did a lot of TV shows, we did a lot of movies, because it was a good way to bring income into the company. And they did them as ballet dancers, so we didn't have to moonlight as anything. They were ballets. But Olive got to be friends of mine, and one day Olive said, John, I just wish your board could resolve this conflict with the Music Center. And I said, well, I wish we could too, but I don't know what the conflict is. I'm not taking any money away from the Music Center. And Olive said, well, Dorothy, Buffy is a very good friend of mine, and Buffy feels you are. She feels your board is taking money away from the LA Philharmonic. And I said, but what can I do? LA should be a cosmopolitan, sophisticated city, and you should have ballet, opera, symphony orchestra, the three pillars of a society. And we have art museums, and she said, well, Buffy, also you have that man from Ambassador Auditorium in Pasadena, Stanley Rader, if you know the name. And he was, I think, the president for it. So he got us to be able to do performances at the Ambassador Auditorium, which is a nice theater. But boy, was that a slap in the face to Buffy. Because in those days, when they opened the Ambassador Auditorium, the Ambassador Foundation had a lot of money, and they were paying musicians like Horowitz and things more money to play there than play at the Music Center. And my little ballet company got caught in the middle because Stanley was on our board. And I said to Olive, will you please tell Buffy we would love to play the Music Center if we could afford it. But they weren't giving us any breaks, whereas the Ambassador Auditorium, because Stanley was on our board, we would get like a really reduced rate to rent the theater. But I said to Olive, we would love to be part of the Music Center and play at the Music Center. But she goes, well, she just says, you can't have Stanley Rader on your board. And would you like to come on board and replace him? what do you want me to do? But anyway, that's what we faced for 10 years. And the end of it was the Joffrey getting their money from Dave Murdoch. You know about that, right? They got $2 million to be named resident company of the Music Center. That's how they were chosen. But never mind. But that finally did it. And then my board finally gave up. And they said, we can't fight it anymore. And I said, damn it. Because we had a big school. We turned out Damien Wetzel, Reed Olson, who's now the most popular dancer in LA, there's a video of him. And my dancers went on to other companies and they did fine. But they all wanted to stay in LA. And they had families here, and the school was big, and just was a real shame. But that's kind of I've spoken for an hour or so. That's the kind of my history in LA.